It's week 7, so of course we have tons of injury updates by this time of the week, and I always wait until the end of the week to go through every matchup to find the must-start and sit defenses, and I'm doing that for week 7. And I'm one of the only fantasy creators who does defense multiple times a week, so please go down there and drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now, getting into our first matchup, it's that overseas game, and last night, that Thursday night game, it proved exactly what I've been trying to tell you guys for many weeks at this point, which is Thursday night defenses, you move them down because Thursday night defenses have not done well this year, and it makes sense because they're coming off a short week. However, those overseas games, the offenses are the problem. They come out flat, unprepared. They don't look the same. That's because they're playing overseas, and there's a lot of new factors like the time change and field conditions. So the defenses end up doing better in fantasy football overseas, and that's exactly what I think we're going to see here with the Rams and the Jags. I prefer the Jags here, and I actually moved up both of them against a defense that we'll talk about here later. I like both of them as must-play options here, and really you can't go wrong with either. The reason I'm choosing the Rams is because I still believe that Jacksonville, I know, has a little bit of a fraudulent element to their offense. I think ETN is definitely slowing down. He's just not as consistent as he once was as being explosive, and that makes them a little more one-dimensional, and I'm not sure Trevor Lawrence could take advantage of the Rams secondary, even though it is bad. I do think the Rams could get after Trevor Lawrence, get some sacks on him, maybe get a couple turnovers as well. And Jacksonville has an advantage with Puka Nacua officially ruled out for the Los Angeles Rams, but the Rams offense is still not one that turns the ball over too many times, and they've kept Stafford pretty clean. But the Jags, again, I think are going to be in good position because this matchup overseas is going to deflect the Rams offense's upside into being a middle-tier offense this week. So I think they're both playable. They're both in that overseas game. You rank both those defenses pretty well overseas. Our next matchup is Philadelphia at the Minnesota Vikings, and there's a couple changes here too. Now, I think they're both still playable. They're both still inside my top. Actually, one of them is inside my top 12 still. The other one got bumped down. The Vikings defense actually got bumped down in favor of the Bears defense moving up, who we'll talk about a little bit later. Now, I think the Vikings defense is still fine to play because Philadelphia's offense is not what it once was. Now, the talent, it's all there, and it's all healthy, by the way. There's a couple things that are a problem here. Number one, their offensive line, they're dealing with tons of injuries right now. They have not been able to protect Jalen Hurts as well as they once did, and therefore, I do think the Vikings defense, with Brian Flores as defensive coordinator, can get after Jalen Hurts. I think he could do it several times in this game. The second thing that's a problem here is their playmakers. It's just stalling out right now. There are a lot of issues as far as chemistry with that offense. I think it's deteriorating for sure, and I think that offensive coordinator isn't very good. So given the fact that we have an aggressive defense with Brian Flores coming off a bye week, I would still think they're playable. And I think the Eagles are a little bit of a better play. They're one spot ranked over the Vikings defense this week, so really pick and choose. But Carson Wentz is the starter in this matchup here, not J.J. McCarthy. So that makes it a little worse for the Vikings, for the Eagles defense this week. I would much rather they play JJ, but I kind of always thought that Carson Wentz was going to start this one anyways. So there's no Aaron Jones, there's no JJ McCarthy, but they still have Justin Jefferson, of course, who will give them plenty of downfield opportunities. I think the Eagles defense is also a problem. They look injured right now as well. They don't look as good. Vic Fangio may be losing his fastball a little bit. I've got concerns with both defenses here, but I still think they're both higher-end plays if you're in a deeper league or you're just not as comfortable with one of the other options inside my top 12 this week. The New England Patriots at the Tennessee Titans is our next matchup here, and I think it's pretty straightforward. I'll keep it short as possible. The Patriots are must start. They're my number one defense on the week and haven't moved. And the Titans defense, you don't play them. I will say this. The only thing I'll say is the Titans are in this position. They just fired their head coach. Sometimes there is a coaching bump post-fire because a lot of times they get fired for a reason in the midseason, right? Things aren't working well. Chemistry's falling apart in the locker room. So sometimes there's a breath of life and fresh air once the head coach gets fired, and they actually end up coming out looking much better than they have in recent weeks. So there is that threat. but the Patriots defense has been good for fantasy. They're coming up with turnovers. They're getting after quarterbacks, and Cam Ward just hasn't looked good enough for me to ever consider not playing the Patriots, especially as a top 3 defense this week. And the Titans defense, they're playing an offense that's kind of a buzzsaw right now, actually. Drake May is playing excellent football. He's got weapons as pass catchers. The running game, I think, probably bleeds the clock late. I don't think there's really much of an angle here to play the Titans defense. The Carolina Panthers at the New York Jets is our next matchup, and this feels sort of straightforward with the exception of course, it's the Panthers, and it's hard to see them as a must play. They did move down my rankings because I ended up moving up the overseas defenses over the Panthers, but I still think the Panthers are a solid play. Like, I couldn't deal with having them inside my top 5, so I ended up moving them down below the Rams and the Jags defenses because I just don't like the Panthers defense. But it makes complete sense. The Jets are without Garrett Wilson. Justin Fields already isn't very good. They don't have any playmakers outside of Breece Hall, and he's going to target Mason Taylor, the tight end. What's going to happen that's going to really make the Panthers a bad play? Of course, the Panthers can shoot themselves in the foot and make this one a bad play themselves, but I just think the Jets offense, they just won't be able to move the ball enough down the field to really make the Panthers a bad play defensively. And I would consider, I actually briefly considered having the Jets inside my top 20, which would make them playable, but I ended up doing the exact opposite, and they're in the bottom 10. So I think the Jets defense are in this position to where, yes, the opportunity actually should be there at home against the Panthers. That's an offense that I don't trust yet still. They've got a new running back situation that may end up hurting their team rather than helping it. There's things that should open up here, but I just can't trust the Jets at this point in time, that's for sure. But I will say this, guys, if you are still in search of your fantasy defense, you need to utilize our automatic waiver wire tool. What always happens is at the beginning of the week or even in the middle of the week right now, when waivers are running, the priority claims after those hit, there's a mad dash to the waiver wire to grab the remaining free agents for free off of the wire. What our process has done is automate that so you can sleep through the night knowing that you beat all your league mates to the waiver wire to grab your players that you wanted. And we've already gotten tons of people saying how much it's pissed off their league, and it's just a real thing that's providing tons of value this year in fantasy football for your team. With the premium subscription as well, you can also get access to my top 250 rankings on a weekly basis, and there's tons of massive other great features on here that are helping your team win this year.
This is Ted. Look at him. Ted desperately needs to pick up a new running back, or his fantasy team is toast. For the 3rd year in a row. And losing his season again means one thing.
Oh, no.
Don't be Ted. Use Fantasy Football Roundup to automate your waiver pickups and rest easy this season. Huh. Look at him.
Now, getting into our next matchup, it's the New Orleans Saints at the Chicago Bears. And again, like I said, I did end up moving the Bears up to my top 12, and they are now, in my opinion, a must-start defense. Now, I would have moved them over the Steelers had I done this move in time, but since I did not do this before last night, the Steelers are exactly where they were because they already played, and you don't get to move them after the fact. That's cheap. The Bears defense, though, I do have as number 11 right now. I think the Bears defense is very, very solid. They've actually looked good in fantasy outside of 1 week, and the Saints obviously can't move the ball enough. But the reason I didn't have the Bears inside the top 12 originally, because I know people will ask me this, is because the Saints offense is actually not the best offense to play from a fantasy perspective as a defense. Because the Saints offense is actually really efficient with what they have, and they don't make many mistakes. So I don't think that there's going to be so many turnovers in this game. Maybe there'll be some sacks, but ultimately, I just believe the Bears don't let up more than 15 or 17 points against the New Orleans Saints. And that's the reason, ultimately, why they made it inside the top 12 and leapfrog over Philly's defense and the Vikings defense as well, for example. The New Orleans Saints, you can't play them. Their defense is already bad, and the Bears offense is moving forward. I will say there's still opportunities they're leaving on the table. I still don't think the Bears offense is running that great. They kind of remind me of the NFC version of the Broncos, to where they've got plenty of talent, but they're just not putting it all together right now. But still, the Saints Saints defense just isn't good enough to take advantage of the opportunity. The Las Vegas Raiders at Kansas City, that's a very straightforward one. Kansas City, you absolutely play them against Geno Smith and a reeling offense. I mean, Brock Bowers is still out. Jacoby Myers doesn't want to play. Like, the guy clearly is pulling a Devontae Adams where he's acting it. I'm not saying he's acting injured. Actually, he may be injured, but still, he doesn't want to play for them. It's been made very clear since before the start of the season. Kansas City's a must-play, and the Raiders with Rashee Rice back in Kansas City and how well Patrick Mahomes is playing right now, you don't want to play the Raiders' defense. The Indianapolis Colts at the Los Angeles Chargers is our next matchup, and I would say that this matchup is a little bit weird. I think the Chargers defense could have been a play had everyone been healthy. Khalil Mack may be coming back this week for them, which would offer massive upside for getting after Daniel Jones and making his life hell. Because realistically, Daniel Jones has been very comfortable in the pocket this year behind one of the best offensive lines in football. You bring Khalil Mack back, that could shake things up a little bit. So I considered briefly putting the Chargers inside the top 20. Ended up not doing that. I'm going to sit that defense. But I would consider playing the Colts defense because of how good they've been this year with Lou Anarumo as that defensive coordinator, how aggressive they are, and the opportunities to push a few buttons with the Chargers offensive line in particular. The run game is still spotty, maybe not as great as maybe everyone thinks ahead of this week because they were dominant last week against the Dolphins defense. This is the Colts defense, so I would not be shocked if Kamani Vidal came out and wasn't very good. I think the Colts defense is really good, and I think the Chargers offensive line is still in shambles. They could get several sacks on Justin Herbert, and really that's what it comes down to and why they're ultimately a playable defense this week, but not one that I would ultimately play over the Vikings defense or the Philly defense, for example. Our next matchup is the New York Giants at the Denver Broncos, and I've said this several times this week. In theory, the Broncos should be able to beat the brakes off the Giants. The Giants have talent deficiencies outside of Cam Skattebo and Jackson Dart. But because of those two, they have tons of energy, tons of momentum, and tons of confidence right now to the point where I think it could be blind confidence and they could go into one of the hardest places to play in football, Denver, and beat them. I really do think it's possible, and that's why the Giants are actually pretty well ranked in my defense rankings this week. If you have a premium membership at FS Roundup, you can see just how high the Giants are ranked. They're playable, man, but I would not play them over the Broncos because the Broncos, leading the league in sacks, they're going to get after Jackson Dart for sure, and they're also just a defense that has talent on the front and the back end. They're going to make life hard for Dart, and I think that it could be a lower scoring game, which is why I ultimately think that both defenses are a solid play. Because there's momentum with the Giants, but there's, in theory and logically, just better talent on the Denver Broncos side of the ball. So the Denver Broncos are a must-play defense because they're elite and they're dominant as a defense, leading the NFL in sacks. And then the Giants, of course, like I've said, just have tons of confidence right now. This could be a weird game. I will tell you guys that right now. The Green Bay Packers at the Arizona Cardinals, if you want to torture yourself. Green Bay is the least playable defense in the playable section for me. Green Bay's defense has been an utter disappointment. Their pass rush has not been very good this year, which is a shock because of the Micah Parsons acquisition. It's almost like kind of how I said in an article I wrote on FS Roundup earlier this year when people asked me to re-rank the Packers defense. I re-ranked them, but I said in that article, I think that he's a little bit overrated. It's almost like that's coming to fruition. But I will say, I definitely expected more from the Packers defense. I thought they had a lot of talent around him. They're just not coming through. That being said, Arizona's got injuries to Kyler and to Marvin. Maybe they play this week. As of the time of this filming, we don't know yet for sure. But I will say this, the Packers defense has an opportunity here for sure, but I'm not convinced they're going to get it done. So I would say they're the least playable, but I would say that they are playable. And the Cardinals defense, not inside the top 20 because I just think that their defense is ultimately not very good. And their team, I think, just has bad vibes around them. And Green Bay's got tons of talent offensively. I will say they're dealing with a lot of injuries right now, so there's maybe a window of opportunity, but I'm going to ultimately just go ahead and sit the Cardinals defense just to be safe. The Washington Commanders at the Dallas Cowboys is an offense-first matchup. You stay away from both defenses. Dallas's defense already sucks, and the Commanders, I will say this, actually sneaky good right now. From a fantasy perspective, they're actually sneaky. But this isn't the week for it. And I think everybody understands that, so we'll move on. The Atlanta Falcons at the San Francisco 49ers are Sunday night matchup where I think both defenses are in play. I will say this could be either a higher scoring affair or it could be lower scoring. I don't trust Atlanta's offense yet, and that's the reason the 49ers are playable, and I would play them over the Falcons even with all the injuries that they have, and it's a lot. Losing Fred Warner was a massive blow to this defense. There's no question. They would probably be in starter territory, arguably, if they had Fred Warner still. That's the piece that matters the most, even more than Nick Bosa. I think that this 49ers defense, though, with Robert Saleh, they're still finding ways to make plays in fantasy football. So I do think they're playable against an offense I don't trust with Penix at quarterback and with that offensive coordinator there. They could put up 30 in certain weeks, but they could also come out and lay an egg like they did against the Panthers several weeks ago. Everything's on the table here for this matchup, and I think the same thing for the Falcons defense. They made the Buffalo Bills offense look pedestrian this past week, and I think that there's room for them to grow off that. There's momentum on their side right now. They came off the bye, handled business against the Buffalo Bills at home. Now they're going to the injury-riddled 49ers, where we don't know if it's Brock yet, we don't know if it's Mac Jones yet, but I can tell you this, the Falcons have momentum on their side. And if they can generate a pass rush, which they should against the 49ers offensive line, they're in play this week entirely. Would I play either defense over the Giants? No, I actually wouldn't. Would I play them over the Packers, though? You bet I would. So they're both very much in play this week, but neither of them is ideal, I would say. The Tampa Bay Bucks at the Detroit Lions, either the highest scoring or the second highest scoring matchup of the week behind Dallas and Washington. You stay away from both defenses. And then the second Monday night game in the doubleheader, which I hate, and I'll continue to say that. Who is asking for these Monday night doubleheaders? Stop doing them. They're so freaking stupid. But the Texans defense, you sit them in Seattle because this is not a place that you want to go play. And I don't think that the Seahawks defense are a bad play. Their defense is elite this year. They're getting tons of sacks. They're getting turnovers. They've got tons of talent. They're young. They're aggressive. They're led by Mike McDonald. There's so many things on the Seahawks side. In Seattle, against the Texans, that offensive line's in shambles, and they will be all year. There's so many opportunities. I'm playing the Seattle Seahawks defense, and they're still inside my top 3. So let me know what your defensive situation is in Week 7, and if you want to see the full top 12 defense rankings for the week, click on this video right here.